Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. A kind of a very special kind of interview coming up with Jim Marshall. Special in a lot of ways because he's going to make you think, really think. We just did some talking. Jim is out in Arizona, my favorite place on earth. It's April 7th. And there's so much to plunge into. So I don't necessarily want to go into long dissertations. I'm still wearing a sweatshirt because it's still cold here in New Jersey. Even though a week ago it was 78 degrees, it's cold and rainy. But I'm with Jim Marshall, and we're going to kind of jump in to his life and his work with Septemics. And again, I want to thank Jim for being so gracious and for being here and for sharing this, his energy, his spirit. I'm going to introduce Jim. If you could just say a couple of intro words and just a brief little intro, Jim, and then I have a couple of, actually I have a bunch of questions to ask you. So take it away.
Okay. Well, I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown human phenomena, from which I created a revolutionary philosophic system called Septemics. That's Septemics, Septemics, and published it in a book called Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. This book would dramatically improve the life of anyone who takes advantage of it. And if you want to find out about Septemics, go to septemics.com. As for my qualifications, I'm a polymathic intellectual whose areas of expertise include psychology, philosophy, theology, parapsychology, science, engineering, mathematics, law, literature, history, metaphysics, military science, political science, physical culture, organization, education, and music.
Wow.
And I hold a Bachelor of Science cum laude from the City University of New York.
Wow. So you just covered some of the things I wanted to ask you about, the polymathic and so forth and so on. I mean, your background is a wow. So I think let's kind of jump into some of the things that I've got written down here, especially to learn about Septemics and as you and I discussed before we went on air, you do so much with consciousness raising, and I told you some of the experiences in my life. There's so much to consciousness raising, and there's so much power there. And I did things in my life without really knowing what I was doing, but it was consciousness raising, and how I changed my life around. So, what would you like our listeners to know? Anything special about you that you haven't just said?
Oh, no, nothing in particular.
You covered. So, okay, so you covered all that.
If you go to my website, there's a lot of information about me.
Fine.
You can get it there.
Perfect. And I did spend a lot of time at your website, and I've got chapter 1 here that I said I've been reading, fascinating stuff. So specifically, Jim, what is Septemics?
Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to human beings occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word Septemics means of or pertaining to 7. Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 such scales, which span the spectrum of human experience. Now, what I mean by that is there is no situation that's going to arise in the life of a human being to which one or more of these scales will not apply. So this subject is universally applicable for humans. And so this book was really for anyone who can read English and wants to improve himself. And I might further specify that there are 24 scales which apply primarily to individuals and 11 scales which apply primarily to groups.
Okay, So I'm actually taking notes, believe it or not. While I'm even interviewing you, my own notes. I'm a great note taker. I'm an old-fashioned note taker from the 60s. How is Septemics beneficial to a person?
I wrote this book to help people. Each of these 35 skills provides the user with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or beneficialness of any group, individual, or activity. If the group, individual, or activity moves persons or groups up these scales, it is beneficial or positive. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. Moreover, just finding out what level you, another person, or some group is at is by itself enlightening and beneficial. Finally, once you know the actual level of a person or group, you can improve that person or group by moving them up one level at a time. All of these advantages represent major steps forward for society. Each of these scales is an axis against which to evaluate human behavior. Combined, they empower one to understand, predict, and manage human affairs to a degree hitherto unattainable by most.
Good. Why would you say Septemics is significant?
Because the data in this book are vital for every human being and can help you to achieve your goals faster and easier by explaining what might otherwise seem to be inexplicable or random. If someone were to invite you to a rendezvous, you would certainly expect him to tell you the exact location and perhaps also how to get there. Needless to say, it's very difficult to get somewhere if you don't know where you are, don't know where you're going, and don't know how to get to your destination. Now, this sounds idiotic, but most people do this regularly. For example, when I started driving extensively before the existence of GPS units, I was surprised to find that most people did not know geographically precisely where they were, nor exactly how to get there. More often than not, my request for directions to the location of the person on the other end of the telephone was requited by vague and often inaccurate instructions, which often did more harm than good. I learned to ask only for the address, which many could not give anyway, and then look it up on a map. If this is so with physical locations, it's even more so with conceptual locations because they are abstract. Most people wander through life aimlessly, so much so that it's considered normal. Whether discussing politics, career, romance, finance, health, you name it, most people do not know where they are going, nor how to get there. If you want to improve your or another's condition, these skills are very useful because each scale is a roadmap for some area of human activity. It enables you to find out precisely where you are, where you're going, and how to get there, given some specific context. There are very few human behavioral contexts to which at least one of these scales does not apply.
Okay. Okay. Just to go off topic for 1 second, because I said I was going to do this. I always like to ask this question. It's a one word. You don't even have to answer it because we're among friends here. So here's the off topic question. Excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with?
A day with?
A day with.
Well, that's a tough question.
It is a tough question.
Jesus of Nazareth.
Perfect. Perfect answer. By the way,
and I ask him mostly, how do you do it? All the other stuff about him I know, but it's the how that's not clear.
I had the great fortune a few years ago to go to Jerusalem and to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is quite an amazing place because everything, so much that happened to Jesus took place there. In the day I was there, they were allowing 2 people at a time to crawl to a little space because they were doing some remodeling there. So I actually was walking with a cane at that point in time. I had to leave my cane, and I crawled through this little space, and I got into Christ's tomb, where he was buried, his casket, and from where he was resurrected. So I was in that little room, and I put my hands on the casket, and I meditated a little bit. Long story, not for here, but it was transformative in my life that I was able to do that. And the following day, I was kind of rewarded for what I did, because I didn't need a cane anymore. These are long stories. But anyway, it was a great answer. And actually, I went the next day from that to Nazareth, because I had to see firsthand the Church of the Annunciation in Joseph's church, which is right next door, as a follow-up to what I did in Jerusalem. It was pretty cool stuff. My life has never been quite the same. But anyway, so that was a great answer. So now we're going to go back to work, Jim.
Okay.
And I love this question because it's kind of a really practical question. How can you use Septemics to improve yourself and your life?
Okay. If you study these scales carefully and use them to resolve your confusions and dilemmas, your life will improve. The more carefully you study the scales and the more diligently and frequently you apply them, the more benefit you will receive. Whenever a question or situation arises in your life, turn to the appropriate chapter and analyze the situation against the relevant scale. Specifically, I would advise you to go through each relevant scale and find your level, either generally or as regards some specific context, by an honest inspection of behavior and situation. Once you are sure you are at a particular level, try to get the idea of being at the next level up. Ask yourself, how would that manifest? Then work out a plan for how you would move up to the next level. If you are correct about what level you're in, it will not be very difficult in most cases to figure out what to do next, however arduous or lengthy the task might be. If you cannot work out how to get up to the next level, generally, it's either because you're actually at a different level than the one you think, or you have not fully comprehended the material.
Okay.
And if you do these steps thoroughly for each scale, you will undergo a metamorphosis. But I should add, in certain cases, certain scales, it might not be possible for you to go up a level in the near future. But merely knowing what level you are at will help considerably.
Okay.
These scales, every one of these scales dispels confusion.
Mhm.
So in order for me to create a subject that spans the spectrum of human experience, I had to create 35 scales that were very different from one another. You cannot determine anything about scale A from studying scale B or from scale C by studying scale D. Every scale is unique. And many of these scales are specific scales, meaning you can take this one scale and revolutionize your whole life with the one scale. For example, there's the scale of motivations. There are 7 basic motivations. Now, knowing somebody's motivation is extremely helpful in understanding what's going on with this person. Now, you can say, well, what is your wife's motivation? What is your son's motivation? What is your landlord's motivation? What is your teacher's motivation? What is your business partner's motivation? So you could just take this one scale and work out the motivations of everyone who's relevant in your life. And by the time you go through the 35 scales and use each of these scales in that way, you will be a different person.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm looking at the scale of basic purposes: saint, leader, winner, normal, loser, criminal, subversive. And I started to kind of plunge into that. It's just really, it's just fascinating stuff, and I'm such a believer in what you can do to your own place in life and how you can elevate yourself, especially if you have the right kind of guidance, i.e. like scales and guidance. I mean, I'm a living example of human potential, what I've done. I'm no Superman, I still go to football and basketball games, but I've done a lot of changes in my life, and it's because I harnessed something I didn't know what the hell I was harnessing. I didn't have a roadmap like you've outlined here. So how can you use Septemics to help others, family, friends, business people? Is there a practical way to help them?
Yes. The best way to introduce someone to this subject is to use a specific scale to help the person resolve a specific problem. This is done as follows. Get the person to explain the situation as fully as possible. Select the appropriate scale or scales for the situation. If you've studied the scales well, this should be easy, as it is often obvious. For example, if one is having spousal difficulties, consult the scale of sexuality and the scale of allegiance. Or if one is having health difficulties, consult the scale of physical fitness. Next, have the person study the glossary for the corresponding chapter and ensure he understands all the words in the scale. Not only is there a glossary for every scale, meaning every chapter, there's also a glossary for the introduction to the book. And this is to resolve the semantic problem. If you look up a word like communication, you'll find it has like 30 or 35 definitions. Well, there is a scale of communication. So a person might say, well, what definition is he using? Well, I tell you, because I give you a specific definition for every major concept in the book. So then have the person study the entire scale carefully, being certain he knows the correct definition of each word. When he's done studying the scale, ask if he has any questions about it or disagreements with it. If so, clear these up, usually by clarifying the meanings of relevant words. Next, help him find where he is on the scale. This step alone should bring considerable relief. If it does not, you probably have the wrong level, or less likely the wrong scale. Time spent on this step is a wise investment. You might ask, how are you manifesting this level? Often, this is all one need do, as one will usually have a realization about the situation as a result of this step. Then help the person to work out a handling that will move him up one level. If you have the right level, this is often easy, if not obvious. A useful technique in this regard is to get the person to visualize first being at the level one is at, and then ask him to transform that visualization into being at the next higher level. When he has done so, ask him how close he came to complete transformation. Then repeat this entire visualization technique until either he says he got all the way there or has a relevant realization and is pleased with the result. Mm-hmm. Finally, get the person to procure a copy of the book so he can study it. There's a much better chance he will benefit from it if he invests something in it. If you really want to clean up somebody's life, either generally or as regards some specific area, help the person to find one's level in all relevant scales. And then coach him to move up one level for each scale. Done correctly, this will bring about major improvements in the person's life. Now, I want to talk about this for a minute in the subject of gradients. The key to learning and improving, either for a person or a group, is gradients. I've worked as a physical trainer. You don't just give a guy 100 pounds and tell him to work with that. That's bad training. First, you have to find out, what can this guy handle? Can he curl 15 pounds on each arm? Can he curl 20 pounds? And when you get the right one, that's the level he's at. And then you have him work at that level until he's ready for the next level. Okay, good teachers know this. A good teacher knows how to take a person who doesn't know any algebra, start him out in the first week, and bring him step by step through. And at the end of the semester, he knows algebra. Bad teachers don't do this. Okay, they do not understand or use the gradients. Now, the primary problem that people have who are serious about correcting a situation is not knowing what to do next. So you say you got a guy who's got a bad relationship. He doesn't know what to do about it. If he did, he would have fixed it. This book solves that problem because each scale is a sequence of gradients. One of the axioms of the subject is that you cannot possibly skip a level. Now, sometimes you might think you skipped a level. You might go through a level quickly or easily, but you went through it nevertheless. It's just like if you're on the second floor and you want to go to the fifth floor, you have to go up, whether it's through the elevator or the stairs, you have to go through each floor to get up there. It's the same thing. You can't skip a level. Now, this is helpful because it tells the person the right gradient. For example, in the scale of physical fitness, if a person is at the level sick, okay, and then he starts manifesting fatigue, exhaustion, that's a good sign because the level above sick is tired. It's known in sports that if the guy gets tired, he will then injure himself. If you keep the athlete fresh, he's probably not going to injure himself. He's not tired because sick and injured, it's two ways of saying the same thing. So that's true for all the scales, where you can, if you find the right level and you want to move up to one higher level, you will be able to do it. It's like nobody can lose 100 pounds. You can lose 1 pound 100 times. You can lose 100 pounds in 100 days if you really try. Most people won't be able to do that. It'll take them much longer than that. But the point is, crash diets and crash exercise programs, for example, don't work because there's no gradient. You have to have the right gradient. And this book has 35 sets of gradients for corresponding areas. Now, when I say corresponding areas, if you like, I can read you the names of the scales, and they will tell you what some of the things are that we're measuring, what the axes are that we're working. Would you like me to do that?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, the scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, the scale of reaction.
Wow.
Those are the individual scales. And the group scales are the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. So you can see we covered most of the things.
Yeah, like,
that
wow,
people are interested in.
wow. Does Septemics apply to everybody? I mean, everybody?
Absolutely,
Okay,
absolutely. Septemics, first of all, you have to be able to read English to read the book, okay? So, but there are about 2 billion people who can read English, okay? But beyond that, the scales themselves apply to all people in general, across all lines, be they gendered, racial, ethnic, historical, social, religious, cultural, economic, educational, professional, geographic, national, age. These scales transcend any other categories of people. Needless to say, the person must make an effort to get these scales to help him in order for them to work. But one could say that about anything.
okay. So we're talking about scales, and I'm holding here from chapter 1, the scale of basic purposes. If you could just, it's there's 7. If you could just a quick, this is kind of a practical part of this interview. So I'm looking here, saint, leader, winner, normal, loser, criminal, subversive. Can you say something about that?
Sure.
Put it into practical.
Yeah, first, I just want to say, reading them off like that is just going to completely confuse anybody who's
Okay.
listening,
Okay,
because it's just a string of words.
okay,
But let me tell you the story of how I discovered Septemics, because this scale was right in the middle of it.
okay,
I was working successfully for decades as a human development engineer, having tremendous success with hundreds of people of every description. And in so doing, I started developing scales. Now, I had one scale in particular that had 6 levels, and I knew that it was correct in the order it was in. In 1995, I discovered a 7th level of that scale, and I inserted it into the middle of the scale. And when I did that, the scale clicked in mathematically. I have an engineering background. I took 26 semesters of math.
wow,
And I saw the mathematics in it. And then I realized I was looking at natural law. That is the scale that turned out eventually to be the scale of basic purposes. I had the scale for many decades before I knew what axis I was measuring. Because observing the scale is one thing, but figuring out what axis it's measuring is a much more complicated thing to figure out. So what happened was, when I found this scale in 1995 and realized that it was natural law, I said, I have all these other scales. I wonder how many of these are also 7-level scales. Now, because I knew what I was looking for, it was not hard for me to find the remaining scales. Now, the way I discovered all these scales is through my work as human development engineer. What I found is, when my clients would improve, they would improve in ways that were predictable to me. I never said that to any client, but I made note of these things. So this just made me better at my job, because I would know what result we were going to get in the session before the session happened, because I knew what the next level up was. So, of course, when you deal with human phenomena, there are many different axes. There's not just one axis. So all of these sort of just appeared to me empirically as I was working with my clients, and I wrote them down. And so I had about 32 scales of various lengths that I knew were correct from empirical observation. So when I was able to extrapolate or interpolate these scales all into 7-level scales, I realized I had found something big. I realized this is a subject. This is natural law. Because of my background in science and engineering and math, I could see that I was observing natural law. For example, the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared in a right triangle. Okay, that was true before this solar system existed, and it will continue to be true after this solar system no longer exists. It's part of the fabric of the universe. It's natural law. And there are many examples I could give like that. 2 sides of an isosceles triangle are equal. That is natural law. So these are inarguable. These scales are in the same category. I would bet my life, in fact, I would bet my son's life, that these scales are correct. Now, you could quibble about the words that I use to name them, because remember, we're labeling an abstraction. So finding the name for an abstraction is always a tricky thing. And that is a lot of what scientists are about, labeling abstractions. They observe something, and they create a scenario where they can observe this to be true or not true. And then when they observe it, then they have to say, what is this? What are we measuring? What are we observing? So I worked on this book for 25 years.
Wow.
And the reason for that is, as an engineer, I'm fundamentally an engineer in everything that I do, which of course is a source of irritation for many people. But nevertheless, that is how my mind works. I was committed to the truth. That's what I'm interested in. Because as engineers, we have to create things that work. The bridge must stand over the river. Okay? So if an engineer cannot create a product, whether it's a conceptual product or a physical product, that works, he has failed. So I spent a lot of time. There are 35 skills, each of which has 7 levels. That's 245 different levels, each of which had to be verified and expressed in a way that made sense. Now, if you look at the scales, you'll see that each is expressed in what you might call a table or a spreadsheet or a matrix. Okay, all of them are like that in order to explain the phenomena. And embedded in all of these are mathematical phenomena. Now, when I wrote the book, I went out of my way to make it accessible, not only to professors and academics and intellectuals, but to the general public. Anyone who wants to improve himself who can read English will benefit from this book. Now, of course, you probably know there are many people who have no interest in improving themselves. Psychopaths and sociopaths and criminals, they're not interested in getting better. It is a well documented fact in the mental health community that psychopaths and sociopaths don't improve in therapy. It doesn't matter how good the therapist is because they're out to lunch. They're not present in the session. They don't care about getting better. They care about getting more money, more women, more limousines, more yachts, whatever, but they're not interested in improving themselves. And also, I can tell you, and I discuss this at great length in the book, there are people who cannot be helped. Now, do-gooders don't want to hear that. But for example, if you take the war crimes trials in Nuremberg in 1945, they tried 20 people. Only one of them expressed the slightest remorse or regret. Albert Speer, the great architect, admitted, he wrote a whole book where he explained this. He was wrong, he did the wrong thing, he regretted it, he had remorse, okay? They did not execute him. They put him in prison. The other 19 had no remorse at all. Those are people who were either psychopaths or sociopaths or criminals of some kind, and you would find them at the bottom of the scale. In fact, you'd find those people at the bottom of most of the scales. So to talk about the scale itself, which you just asked me about, okay, I'm going to start at the bottom. The lowest basic purpose is the purpose to destroy. Now, realize everyone has thousands of purposes. If you say, I want to go to the beach tomorrow, that's a purpose. But that's not your basic purpose. Every human being has one basic purpose. And I'll tell you, this is a persistent trait. Most people live their entire life at one level of the scale. I could give you examples of times when that changed, that there was a variation from that. For example, Saul on the road to Damascus. Saul was a Jew who was a Roman citizen, and his job was to oppress this dangerous cult called Christianity, which was a respectable job. And on the road to Damascus to oppress the Christians in Damascus, He had this experience, which is discussed in the Bible, which millions of people know about, where there was a light in the sky and a voice spoke to him, and he was knocked off his horse, and he had this epiphany, and he became Saint Paul, and it was he who spread Christianity to the Gentiles.
Wow.
Okay, so he went from level 2, leader, to level 1, saint. That is an example of a person who changed on this scale. Now, a person can also change on this scale downwards if he's badly traumatized. For example, people who were in Nazi concentration camps and survived, most of them were knocked down a level as a result of that. So let me finish telling you about the levels. The lowest basic purpose is the purpose to destroy. Most people cannot understand this because it doesn't make any sense. Most people do not have the purpose to destroy. Even most criminals, they're not intent on destruction. They will kill you if you get in their way, but that's not really their purpose. You know, they want the $1 million worth of drugs. And if you don't give it to them, they'll kill you. But they don't really want to kill you. They just want the drugs. So there's a very small percentage of people whose basic purpose is to destroy. And among those people are Hitler and Pol Pot. And if you study those people carefully, you will see they did inherently destructive things, things that were destructive to their own purposes, to their own initiatives, to their own people, okay? This is as crazy as you can get. That's the lowest level, level 7. Above that, level 6 is the criminal. Most people understand this, okay? People who are professional criminals in organized crime, there are many criminals in government. There's probably more criminals in government than any other single group. And those people, their purpose is pleasure. They don't want to get better. They don't want to help anybody. Whatever pleasure means to them, they want sex, they want alcohol, they want music, they want to see plays, they want to go on vacations. They're out for pleasure, okay? And they will do whatever they have to do to get pleasure. That's the criminal. Most people understand that. Above that is the 7th level that I found, the final level that I discovered on the scale, which is the loser. Now, a loser is not simply somebody who's doing badly. It's someone who sabotages himself inherently. The purpose of the loser is to suffer. Now, again, this makes no sense to most people, but I'm sure you've seen people like this. There are people who will be in a terrible relationship, you know, where the spouse is wrecking the person's life and they don't get out of it. Now, normal people, when they get in a bad relationship, they say, I'm out of here, okay? But the loser will not do that. The loser will use something to destroy himself. Some say sometimes sequentially. If they can't destroy themselves by being in a bad relationship, they'll use drugs, they'll use alcohol. Many of them commit suicide. They'll do something. And I'm sure you've seen people like this. Most of these people wind up either in prison, in an insane asylum, or homeless people. Many of them die early in life from one thing or another. So these people are inherently self-destructive. And there's really nothing you can do to stop that, because if you try to help this person, you're opposing his most basic purpose. This explains a lot. People who have kindness and generosity in them want to help such people, and it doesn't work out with those people because they're inherently self-destructive. Above that is level 4, which is the normal. The normal is not trying to set the world on fire. If you watch reruns of Ozzie and Harriet, which ran for 15 years on TV, it was all about normal people. They have a house, they have a job, the kids go to school, they belong to a club, okay? That's what that show is about. Everybody in that show is a normal. And of course, this is the largest group. So it relates to a lot of people. These people are not going to try to do anything extraordinary. The purpose of the normal is conformity. Now, most people think of conformity in a bad light, but think of it this way. They want to fit in. If people have iPhones, they want to have an iPhone. If people have station wagons, they want to have a station wagon. If people have vacation homes, they want to have a vacation home. They want to fit in. You know, these people who, you know, if mustaches come in, guy grows a mustache. When mustaches go out, he shaves off the mustache. This person wants to fit in. Okay, that is the normal. Level 3, above that, is the winner. Being a normal is not enough for a winner. The winner wants to win. For example, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were winners. And if you study them, you can see that. They were extremely successful at everything they did. They wanted to excel, okay? The winner is feathering his nest one way or another. Not everybody wants to win it the same way. One guy wants to be the world's greatest basketball player. That's how he wants to win. Another guy wants to be the world's greatest guitarist, okay? So winning means different things to different people. But these people intend to win. That's what they're about. Above that, level 2 is the leader. Now, the leader is a person who very often has a terrible life. For example, Abraham Lincoln was a leader. Most scholars, myself included, think he was the greatest of all presidents. He had almost no help from anybody. His generals wouldn't fight until 3 or 4 years into the war. He discovered Grant, who was an obscure, unknown person. His cabinet wasn't with him. Lincoln had a terrible life. He had at most 1 year of schooling and became possibly the best lawyer in the state of Illinois on his way to becoming president of the United States. Now, he was determined to conquer the Confederacy. And if you read everything he said, all the books written about him, some of which I read, you can see that. He was telling his generals, we are going to conquer the Confederacy. He did not necessarily use those words, but that's what he was telling them. And he did. He conquered them. And in doing so, he did what was considered impossible by almost everybody at that time, which is he ended slavery and he preserved the Union. And it wasn't enough for him to defeat the Confederacy. He then pushed through, primarily on his initiative, the 13th Amendment, which outlawed slavery forever by a constitutional amendment. So he suffered horrendously. If you study this man, he was clinically depressed most of his life. He had terrible things happen to him. And of course, for all of his trouble, he got a bullet in the back of the head. Okay, not unusual for leaders. If you study leaders, you'll see this happens to them. Above that is the highest purpose of all, which is the purpose to transcend. Here you find people like Jesus of Nazareth, Siddhartha Gautama, Yogananda, great spiritual leaders. These people are not interested in the things that most of us are interested in. They're not interested in wealth, fame, adulation. They want to transcend to a higher level. Now, different saints belong to different religious traditions, so they will articulate it in a different way. If you talk to a Christian, he'll say he wants to go to heaven and become an angel or something like that. If you talk to a Buddhist, he'll say he wants to attain nirvana. If you talk to a Hindu, he'll say he wants to resolve all of his karma. These are saying essentially the same thing. Okay, so those are the 7 levels. Now, there's a lot I could say about the scale. It has inherently mathematical factors built into it, which you can see when you look at the matrix. And there are even subcategories on it. This is the most important scale. If you find your level on this scale, it will dramatically help your life. Because once you know your basic purpose, everything else is simple and clear. You know what not to mess with and what's important to you. And it also helps you to understand other people. For example, I can tell you with precision, the basic purpose of every president of the United States going back as far as FDR, because I studied these men, their speeches, their writings. I observed them in film and such. Now, before FDR, we don't have as much because FDR was the one who really started going on the radio and talking. Prior to that, it was harder to find out. I would have to actually read biographies of Calvin Coolidge, Warren G. Harding, and so forth to find out. Of course, I already mentioned Lincoln and Washington and Jefferson. Those are people I have studied, so I was able to determine it. And I'll tell you something else. It's no secret where a person is on any of these levels. If you know these scales, you can look at a person 5, 10, 15 minutes and know where he is on a particular scale. You can spot him because people will tell you their level. Even if they want to conceal it, they can't. So you have to realize these levels exist, just like the Copernican theory. The Earth was revolving around the sun for billions of years before there were people. And after we're all dead, it will continue to revolve around the sun. Okay. Now, in 300 BC, a Greek philosopher whose name eludes me at the moment presented that idea, but it didn't catch on for 1800 years until Copernicus suggested it, which is why it's sometimes called the Copernican Theory. Mm-hmm. And Galileo, who learned of this, propounded the same theory, for which he was imprisoned for the rest of his life by the Catholic Church. So that phenomena existed. Now, prior to Copernicus and Galileo, very few people were aware of it. So what I'm telling you is these scales exist. Now, you can ignore them. You can pretend they're not there, but every human being is at a level on every one of these scales. Now, you can stay ignorant about it if you want, but if you want to make your life easier and smoother and improve yourself and help the people around you, you will use these scales the same way that I used the Pythagorean theorem. When I was a math student, anything that came up that had a square, there's 1,000 ways to use the Pythagorean theorem. And I would solve math problems using that all the time because it's inherently true. And that is what engineers do. Engineers take data that are provably true, factually determined, and they use them to craft solutions to specific problems. Okay, that is what I did in this book. Now, as a human development engineer, I helped hundreds of people. So now I'm going from helping hundreds to helping millions. Because this book can go where I cannot go. It can go into the home of 2 billion people. And after I'm dead, people will still be able to read this book and benefit from it.
Wow, I'm listening, I'm taking notes. There's a million things comments I want to make, but I'm gonna. It's so interesting, Jim, because when I was in sales, I took 50 courses because that's what my bosses, the richest Italians in the world, had me do at Luxottica, and it was to improve me. And one of the courses I took, which has some parallel, I'm looking at this, the winner, I think, but the point I'm making and why I so believe in the practicality of what you're talking about, and to me that's really important, to take something in theory and put it into practical use. So one of the courses I took was on social styles of selling. And it took the people who I'm selling eyeglasses to, and it put them into 4 categories. Driver personality, somebody who needs to be in control, an amiable who wants to be liked by everybody. I think that is the winner category in your scale. Then there's an expressive, just somebody who's just happy-go-lucky and expressive. And then there's an analytical. So in order for me to, I'll give you an example, because it really ties into what you, as I'm listening to you. If I wanted to sell a driver personality eyeglasses, and I determined, just like you said, people in these various scales telegraph who they are. So if I wanted to sell a driver personality, you driver somebody who needs to be in control. So if I would go in to a driver and say, you need to buy this eyeglass, there would be a wall of buyer's resistance that would go up. And he said, no, I'm not interested, because I used the wrong approach and the wrong terminology. Because he has to be in control, and I was trying to wrest that control away. So the sale is over. I'm not selling him. But if I were to go to him knowing he's a driver type personality, and I would say to him, do you think you could use this eyeglass, this frame? So I'm giving him the power. I'm giving him the authority that he craves and needs to have. So the minute I say, do you think, he'll say, yeah, okay, give it to me. And I made the sale. And I can't tell you how many times I use that. But there's a relationship of that to what you were talking about. I was trying to digest that. Of course, you're much more elaborate, obviously, so much more elaborate, but it's real. So I'm listening to things you're saying, and it's real and it works. So to me, this was a wow experience listening to you. Finally, the last thing I want to ask you, as when I go to promote and put this up on YouTube, there's a logo that you use, which I'm going to use. Can you tell me about that logo? What it
Yes.
means?
The logo is a visual representation of Septemics. It's a 7-pointed star. There are 7 levels. Each one is a different color, and they together make a spectrum. So each scale is a spectrum that has 7 levels.
Okay.
And of course, by being a star, they're all pointing in different directions. They're going in different places, and they have different colors. And so that's sort of the basic idea of Septemics, is in that logo.
Okay, perfect. We've done a great introduction into Septemics, and I have to thank you again for your energy and your time and your brilliance in putting this all together. I need to digest it more. As I say to my guests, you're always welcome to come back. We can talk more, because there's probably a million questions, and I always look for practical applications of things. That's just who I am. But this was great stuff, and I just wanted to thank you once again, Jim.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. Actually, you kind of made my day because you filled me with a lot of stuff here.
Great.
I like to get filled. So listen,
I do want to say one thing.
yes.
I talked to you about the scale of basic purposes. Okay, now I want to point out that's one of 35 scales, okay? Each scale is a different axis. So it's easy to sort of get carried away on that one scale and have a misconception about what the subject is about. What I'm saying is there is absolutely, undeniably something in this book for everyone, because there are 35 scales, each of which is unique, has its own functions and its own implications. So I just want to clarify that.
That's good. That's good. I'll have all the information up when I promote septemics.com. I'll have it all there. I'll have your bio. And I do hope you do come back. So
Okay.
thank you so much, Jim. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Coleman.